To continue with our course, today we're going to cover all of Book 3 and about a third of Book 4. These last two chapters, or the two books rather, there's very little of it has been translated by the Baha'i World Center. So a lot of the areas that we're going to cover have not been discussed even in Dr. Sa'idi's book. But I'll try to do my best to give you more of an overview as we have been doing. Now, in his general description of Váḥid 3 through 9 of the Bayan of Farsi, Dr. Nader Saidi in his book Gate of the Heart writes, he says Book 3 through 9 of the Persian Bayán are devoted to analyzing the characteristics and duties of the spiritual community in relation to the primal unity and the writings of the Bab. In other words, if the first unity addresses the ultimate origin of the spiritual community and the second unity discusses the creative word through which that spiritual community comes into being, then the rest of the Persian Bayán deals with the attributes that befit human beings as mirrors of the Bayan and the primal unity, which I felt this was a great overview, a good succinct analysis of what the next chapters or the next books of the Persian Bayán are going to be. Dr. Saidi further adds that the link between the first unity, or Book 1, dealing with the primal unity, and the subsequent unities, the laws pertaining to all things, is the principle outlined in the second unity in Book 2, which we discussed, of the creativity of the divine word. The primal unity creates all other realities through the word revealed by the primal point. The Bayan, he goes on to say, like all the Bab's writings in general, and the Persian Bayán in particular, is the unity that encompasses all things and which brings all things to life through the creative divine word. Now, looking at Book 3 in general, Book 3 with 30 handwritten pages in the Tehran Azali manuscript, which takes it from page 74 to 104 in its original language, is the third shortest book of Váḥid of the Bayan of Farsi. So it's not very long, but there's a lot of topics, some of them very abstruse, that the Bab discusses here. To just give you a perspective, however, when you translate that into a Western language, Nicolas' French translation of Book 3 is exactly 60 pages in length. So this 30 handwritten almost gets doubled, when you translate it. And in the Le Bayan Persan Volume 2, it covers the pages 13 to 73 of that book. Unfortunately, only two small selections have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center, and they happen to be extracted from chapters 12 and 13, which we will discuss. But the rest of the Book 3 has not been translated up to this point. So let's start with Book 3, Chapter 1. It has been translated. No parts of it, rather, has been translated by Baha'i World Center, nor any parts of it has been discussed or quoted by Dr. Saidi in his book. The title and the general theme of this chapter is rather abstruse, and I wish for us not to delve into it at this time. However, among the less mystical principles discussed by the Bab in this chapter is the primacy of Him whom God shall make manifest. I mean, everything about Him whom God shall make manifest echoes through all the chapters and books of the Persian Bayán, as you know, and so it's ubiquitous there. But here he speaks of the primacy of Him whom God shall make manifest, whom he states that no one should question his injunctions at the time of his revelation. And this comes back up again, that it is it is unworthy to ask questions, of his stature and his station and so on. So we'll come back to this. So this chapter consists of 32 handwritten lines in its original language, making it among the average chapter lengths for book 3. And now we move on to chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2. So chapter 2, no parts of it has been translated by the Baha'i World Center, nor any parts of it have been discussed by Dr. Saidi in his book. Like chapter 1, the general theme of this chapter is rather abstruse, and we shall not discuss any parts of it at this time. I'm sorry we have to kind of move forward with it. There's just so much material to cover, and some of these topics are really, gets very deep, and it's really not within the scope of our presentation. Believe me, I would love to go into more depth with you, but it's not possible. It has 36 handwritten lines in its original language, making it among the average chapter lengths of book 3 as well. Now, chapter 3, it begins with these words: on that the Bayan and all that is therein revolves around the word of him whom God shall make manifest, as the gospel of Jesus and all that is therein revolves around the word of Muhammad, the apostle of God. Then he goes on to say that the substance of this gate or chapter is that nothing could be in the forefront of the Bayan except that which is in the direction of him whom God shall make manifest, for none save him hath ever been or will ever be capable of elevating the Bayan, inasmuch as no one but him hath revealed or will ever reveal it. This is very fascinating in that the Bab says, he makes two very important statements as related to him whom God shall make manifest. And he says, essentially, it is him whom God shall make manifest that's revealing the Bayan and has revealed it, even though it's in the person of the Bab at this point. So this should give clues to the fact that the reality of the Bab and Baha'u'lláh are the same, as Baha'u'lláh has stated in Surah Al-Haykal, quoted by Shoghi Effendi in his Dispensation of Baha'u'lláh letter. And also here, the Bab underscores that it is through the words of him whom God shall make manifest that the station and the scope and the excellence of Bayan is going to be fully realized. If you recall, in the previous book, the Bab talked about the fact that only as far as understanding the contents and the deeper meaning of the Bayan, only him and him whom God shall make manifest and those who he empowers or he bestows the knowledge of that can really interpret and and fully understand the content of the Bayan. So here, this is kind of an echo of that first statement in book 2, and you will see that as well discussed by the Bab in further chapters and further books of the Persian Bayán as well. Now the Bab also continues that the Bayan and such as are believers therein yearn more ardently after him than the yearning of any lover after his beloved, even as the Quran and such souls as pertain unto it yearned after the revelation of its revealer and never had any goal, nor will ever have any end but him. And he goes on to say, today the Furqan, which is the revelation of Islam, bestoweth salutations upon those letters who uplifted it and caused it to enter in the Bayan, while it beseecheth its revealer to torment those souls that have turned away from the Bayan, failing to give the Furqan its due measure. So as we saw how the Bab states that the resurrection of each of these revelations are the revelations that come after, obviously, and how that the resurrection of Islam is really the revelation of the Bayan, and this is how this ties into that whole premise that the Bab had already introduced earlier. Few lines later in chapter 3, the Bab adds, in the day of the revelation of him whom God shall make manifest, the Bayan will fix its eyes upon its believers while saying unto them, is there any spirit related to me who would step forth in this day to acknowledge him whom God shall make manifest, and thus be faithful to the covenant of his Lord that is established in me. And continuing on that thought, he adds, it, the Bayan, would rejoice if its faithful believers recognize its revealer, and would be saddened if its faithful believers cause its revealers any grief. Now, this goes back to, again, the recognition by many of the Bábís who became Bahá'íds, with the exception of a small band. And these are the group that Baha'u'lláh in his writings refer to as the people of Bayan. And he admonishes them, he quotes from the Bab, and particularly a book that is, I think there's some foreshadowing of it, here, which we'll get to it, that I found very fascinating, is Kitab Badi. Kitab Badi is one of Baha'u'llah's only apologia, which unfortunately has not been translated into English, but it is a mighty book revealed by the Blessed Beauty during his exile to Adrianople, and it's been revealed in a very fascinating way. It was revealed in response to some of the criticism and accusations of a very prominent Azali to one of the believers, one of the companions of Baha'u'lláh, where Baha'u'lláh actually reveals this book, just a magnificent book, with such speed in a matter of 6 hours, which is just mind-boggling. But he reveals it as though it is the individual who was the recipient of that letter, who brought that to Baha'u'lláh. Baha'u'lláh revealed it, but he revealed it as though is that faithful companion of Baha'u'lláh is rebuttaling the accusations of this Azali. It's very fascinating, and God willing, one day we'll do a course on that. But that is essentially, it's a book where Baha'u'lláh quotes from the writings of the Bab and establishes his own revelation, substantiate the validity of his revelation, and it's truly a magnificent apologia that he presents to the Azalis, or the people of the Bayan. Immediately after this passage, the Bab, actually, I don't think I read all of it, so to go back into, we said a few lines later, the Bab adds, in the day of the revelation of him whom God shall make manifest, the Bayan will fix its eyes upon its believers while saying unto them, I think we did read that, and it was this one, yes. So he says, it would rejoice, Bayan would rejoice if its faithful believers recognize its revealer, and would be saddened if its faithful believers cause its revealer any grief. And there were those, some very small number of Bábís who had become Azalis, who criticized Baha'u'lláh and asked him inappropriate questions and brought grief to his heart, which the Bab had unequivocally forbidden to do that. So they violated the covenant of the Bab by doing that. Thus, today, nothing is more afflicted with anguish than the Furqan. He goes on to say, all recite it, yet they fail to receive its blessings and attain naught but its torment, even as those who were reciting the book of Aleph, the Gospel of Jesus, in the day of the revelation of the Furqan. So essentially, he states that those who fail to recognize the fruit of the revelation, of the previous revelation, which is the new revelation, they are truly have broken the covenant which was established by the previous revelation. For example, the covenant that was established in Islam for the coming of the promised one was broken by majority of the Muslims for failing to recognize their Mahdi, their Qa'im, who was the Báb. In fact, the Báb makes reference to this again in another subsequent chapter as well. So you will see that theme being reiterated and re-emphasized throughout the Bayan as well. Immediately after this passage, the Báb makes an impassioned plea to his followers. This is very wonderful. Again, this is, I translated this, so it's a provisional translation. He says, "O people of the Bayan, do not commit that which the people of the Furqan, that is the Muslims, have committed in this day, and do not be veiled from your beloved by anything whatsoever, for the grandeur of the Bayan can only be realized through ascension towards him whom God shall make manifest." Ascension here, he uses that word mi'raj or uruj, which basically means to ascend towards. So here the ascension means that for moving towards him whom God shall make manifest, as opposed to removing oneself and becoming remote from him whom God shall make manifest. Okay, so that's the extent of chapter 3 that we will cover here. Let's see if we can do this in parts. Chapter 4 begins with these words, "On this, that what God hath revealed unto him," meaning the Báb, "of verses and words is greater and more exalted in rank than what the Lord hath previously revealed." So here, the Báb is stating, again, echoing what he spoke about, the profusion of the creative words in chapter 2, where he talks about that within the span of 5 hours, 1,000 verses are revealed. And then here, when you look at the revelation of Islam, or the revelation of the Quran, the entire Quran was revealed intermittently through the lips of Prophet Muhammad over 23 years. So, the Bayan here is almost twice the size of the Quran, and it's been revealed in the fraction of that period. I want to kind of draw your attention this 9 months that the Báb was confined in the fortress of Maku seems to be one of the most fertile period. As was pointed out, it was a transition period to the third period of his revelation, and several of his major works, including the Bayan, were revealed. Dala'il al-Sab'a was also revealed here, the 7 proofs, which is very important, very significant. It's not as voluminous as the Bayan. The Arabic Bayan as well. And also we know that the Báb revealed 9 commentaries of the entire Quran, 9 separate commentaries. So yeah, you have to, when you start putting it into perspective, that the Báb was not just engaged in revealing the Bayan during this period, simultaneous to the revelation of the Bayan. It seems he was revealing other works, which is just mind-boggling. And so I want you to kind of get a perspective on that, that you know, he wasn't just sitting around revealing the Bayan during this 9 months. He was doing so much more. And so here, when he says that what God hath revealed unto the Báb of verses and words is greater than and more exalted in rank than what the Lord hath previously revealed. Okay, so, and that's just a fact. You know, Baha'u'lláh in the Tablet of Ahmad, he says, you know, إِنَّهُ لَسُلْطَانُ الرُّسُولِ وَكِتَابَهُ لَأُمُّ الْكِتَابِ. He says that verily he is the king of the messengers. See this appellation, this epithet of a king. King is supreme. So there's other messengers that we have, but there is, now he's the king of the messengers. So everybody else is under the shadow of the king. You know, the king is the supreme ruler. So again, theologically here, this claim, the rank of this revelation, this new cycle, this revelation of fulfillment, is far greater than the previous revelation. In fact, Baha'u'lláh speaks about this, quoting Ja'far al-Sadiq, that tradition that knowledge consists of 27 letters, and that only 2 letters of it had been revealed, and then the remaining 25 letters would be revealed by the Qa'im. I mean, there you go. I mean, truly, the proof is in the pudding here. The essential theme of this chapter, chapter 4, is that the creative words of each divine revelation is always more exalted in rank and carries a higher significance than the previous revelation. So the Bab talks about that, for example, the revelation of Islam, its creative words, namely the Quran, is more superior in rank than the Gospel of Jesus. And he makes that very explicit in his explanation. So the Bab states, for there is no first but for a second, and no second but for a third, and no third but for a fourth, and so on to infinity. I thought to translate this for you. It's very fascinating. He says, inasmuch as the apostle of God, may the blessings of God rest upon him, was more exalted in rank than Jesus, peace be upon him. And as such, the Quran is more superior than the previous book, that is the gospel. And likewise, in the next revelation, and the revelation after next, him whom God shall make manifest. I found this statement by the Bab very rather remarkable, in that he very sensitively tells the Muslims that what he is revealing is more exalted than the Quran. Now, again, you have to understand, for a Muslim, the Quran, a faithful Muslim rather, the Quran is the center of their universe. And everything, when they get up in the morning, when they, whatever they do is the supreme book, the supreme thing that is the guide for their lives, that they live for, is the Quran. So the Bab here very sensitively, rather than explicitly state that the Quran, that his writings are superior than the Quran, he does it by giving the analogy of the previous revelation. And then in this sentence, he says that then likewise in the next revelation, he says, and then the revelation after next. So he says this is progressive, and this is just, it's part of the great redemptive plan of God, as the Guardian calls it. So, here I found that this statement, it was very, very special, in that rather than come out and explicitly shatter the perception of an average Muslim who's going to read this, he very gently tells them that, yes, that the time for the Quran is now past. Now, this is your new Quran. And this is what God's will and purpose for you is today. And with only 17 handwritten lines in the original language, chapter 4 is among the shorter chapters of book 3. A remarkable chapter in that it's not very long, but it has so much depth and so much to reflect upon. And again, I don't think I've really done justice to the entire chapter, but just trying to give you a little taste of it with that translation. But there's more. There's always more that is presented by the Bab, which we are here just highlighting only the bare essentials of that chapter. No parts of chapter 4 has been translated by the Baha'i World Center, nor any parts of it has been discussed or quoted by Dr. Saidi in his book. Now in chapter 5, also, no parts of it has been translated by the Baha'i World Center, nor parts of it have been discussed by Nader in his book. With only 7 handwritten lines, it is the second shortest chapter of book 3. The general title, or rather the title and the general theme of this chapter is somewhat abstruse, and we shall forego a detailed study of it at this time. Suffice it to say that the key spiritual verity which the Báb discusses in this chapter is the principle of he doeth whatsoever he willeth and ordaineth whatsoever he pleaseth, and that no one has the right to question that he willeth. So when the Báb, it seems, introduces something that is earth-shattering to the previous revelation, like telling them that their scripture is no longer valid, or that the rank of the new revelation is more superior than the past, he basically seals that statement with this phrase, which is also in Islam, that God doeth whatsoever he willeth and ordains whatsoever he pleaseth. We have it even in the Kitab Aqdas, yaf'alu ma yasha wa la yus'alu amma sha'a. It's that he doeth whatsoever he willeth and no one has a right to question. And this seems to be the pattern in which God, when he reveals a new principle, and a principle where he feels, or an injunction that he feels his creatures are going to have some issues with it perhaps, or may find them challenging, he basically says, you have to accept it because it is the word of God. You are my creatures. You will listen to what I tell you. And here the Báb is echoing that principle that is also very familiar to the Muslims. Moving on to chapter 6. Again, no parts of it have been translated or discussed previously. With only 11 handwritten lines, chapter 6 is among the shorter chapters of book 3 as well. This chapter, like the previous chapter, is rather abstruse and is beyond our concise overview. To give you some clues into the profundity of the Báb's exposition in this chapter, the opening line after the title reads, "The substance of this gate or chapter is that God hath revealed in the Bayan a word which is the epitome of all knowledge. That is, verily I am God, there is no God but me, and all else is my creation. Fear me then, O my creation." So he goes on and expounds on this notion. So as you can see, it can be a very deep and profound discussion. And again, we don't have the time to go into all the nuances and how beautifully and elegantly the Báb presents his argument and discusses this notion. Chapter 7 of book 3 begins with these words, "On this, that what hath been intended by God's revelation of meeting him, liqa'u'lláh, or liqa'ahu, or attaining the presence of the Lord, is him whom God shall make manifest, for verily God, by virtue of his essence, can never be seen." Now, this is a very important topic, and we shall discuss a little bit more on this because Bahá'u'lláh talks about this also in the Kitab-i-Iqan, and it's worth pausing here and looking at this. So meeting God in all the revelations of the past, there's this promise of attaining to the presence of God, because as creatures, we all have this deep inner yearning to get to know our creator. Who is our creator? These are one of the fundamental questions that as we grow, as we come of age, we start asking a question, in our teens, and it continues to the rest of our lives. And oftentimes we're disappointed because we don't have a full understanding of that. In the Baha'i faith, obviously, there's been a lot of light shed upon to the extent of how we know God and attain his presence is through his manifestations. And this is where the Bab also, echoes and underscores that notion. So this notion that the Bab is now presenting as far as liqa'ahu or liqa'ullah is something that Baha'u'lláh has extensively discussed in the Kitab-i-Iran. So this obviously precedes Baha'u'llah's more in-depth and thorough explanation, but the Bab's explanation is almost identical to that. So I found that to be very fascinating. So liqa'ahu, it's meeting him, and then liqa' ar-Rabb, that these are the attaining to the presence of the Lord. And then the Bab says that the object of that is him whom God shall make manifest. And he even forgoes himself, even though he has already spoken that he does speak about the fact that he represents God. He is the manifestation of God. But again, he emphasizes the fact that the supreme attainment is really attaining unto him whom God shall make manifest. And this really underscores the fact that the coming of this great him whom God shall make manifest is very imminent. And this is where the argument for many of the Azalis who basically said, no, Baha'u'lláh was a false prophet or a false him whom God shall make manifest, in that, and they come up with all these just ridiculous numbers and dates that, it's going to happen in a few hundred years. At first, Azal had written that it was going to happen in 20, 30 years. And then when that came and went, it's like the Adventist, prophecies that, once there's the great disappointment, then they say, oh, no, we didn't really read it well. No, it's meant to be, at a later date. And they keep postponing that, which is very ignorant. And Baha'u'lláh has talked about that in his writings, that, it is here and now. The same way that the Muslims were veiled, particularly the Shia Muslims, that the Qa'im had appeared, and then he, the Bab says that you invoke his name every day, you shed tears for his coming, and yet when he came, you exiled him and put him in this remote prison on top of a mountain. How sad. So this is, again, sort of history repeats itself, sadly, here. Now, 2 lines later in this chapter, the Bab states that which hath been mentioned in the heavenly books concerning attainment unto his presence is attainment to the presence of God's manifestation, who is none other than the point of truth, nuqteye haqiqat, and his primal will, mashiyat awwaliyeh. Okay, so this is where he says, liqa'ullah is mashiyat awwaliyeh, nuqteye haqiqat, that's attaining. So if you have attained my presence, essentially, he says, you have attained the presence of God. Now, I wanted to share with you the major theme of this rather short chapter of Book 3 is liqa'ullah, or attainment to the presence of God. The Bab's elucidation of this important theological notion is almost identical to that of Baha'u'llah's exposition on this theme in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf and the Book of Certitude. And I want to share with you that excerpt that Baha'u'llah shares in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. Many of you have read this, but it's worth mentioning it because it's very appropriate here. In the Loha ibn Zeb, Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, Baha'u'llah briefly expounds on the meaning of liqa and then refers the reader to his elucidation on this subject in the Kitab-i-Iran. The one in the Kitab-i-Iran is very extensive. It's about 4 pages long, and many of you have studied it and read it. And but here in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, he gives a succinct overview of that. And he says that, let's go back to here. Oh, I'm not getting it. Okay. In all the divine books, the Bab writes in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, in all the divine books, the promise of the divine presence hath been explicitly recorded. By this presence is meant the presence of him who is the dayspring of the signs and the dawning place of the clear tokens and the manifestation of the excellent names and the source of the attributes of the true God. Exalted be his glory. God in his essence and in his own self hath ever been unseen, inaccessible, and unknowable. La yudrak. By presence, therefore, is meant the presence of the one who is his vicegerent amongst men. Beautifully, succinctly stated. And then Baha'u'lláh continues in the next slide. He says, he moreover hath never had, nor hath he any peer or likeness. For were he to have any peer or likeness, how could it then be demonstrated that his being is exalted above and his essence sanctified from all comparison and likeness? Briefly, there hath been revealed in the Kitab-i-Iqan concerning the presence and revelation of God that which will suffice the fair-minded. So this is where Baha'u'lláh refers Sheikh Najafi, the recipient of that magnificent work, Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, to read the Kitab-i-Iqan for further elucidation on this subject. So this is a very important Liqa'ullah, is a very significant notion that has been discussed by Baha'u'llah, and even I believe Abdul Baha has further interpretation, but the explanation and elucidation of both the Bab and Baha'u'llah are very clear, and to me I think is sufficient. Moving on to chapter 8. Again, this is one of those chapters that have not been translated. It has 67 handwritten lines. It's the second longest chapter of Book 3. It is entitled on this, that whatever is in the greater world, found that very interesting. It's a reference, greater world, al-alam al-akbar, is in the Bayan. So again, he does not explain what this alam al-akbar is. Okay, I mean, that's probably the universe, you know, because there's alam, as they say in Persian and in Arabic, which denotes the world, and that's what, you know, in the world, you know, Jami'a alam, you know, the entire world. But here the Bab makes a distinction and calls it alam akbar. It says the general theme of this chapter is rather profound and mystical. He goes into it again, but unfortunately we don't have the time to go into it. The title of this chapter is very telling of the abstruseness of this subject matter, which is the one that I just read to you on this, that whatever is the greater world is in the greater world is in the Bayan. So everything that you can possibly think of under the sun, so to speak, is in the Bayan, according to the Bab. So there is it's quite a statement there, but we shall relegate that to another time and another discussion. Moving on to chapter 9, it's entitled on this, that what is in the Bayan is in each verse of the Bayan. So this is a further elaboration of the previous chapter. And again, although it's a much shorter in length than chapter 8, and with only 11 handwritten lines, its general theme is somewhat similar to that of the previous chapter. Hence, we will also not discuss it at this time. Unfortunately, I hate to do that, but again, we will have to move forward with it. Chapter 10. Chapter 10 and 11 are also very similar, and neither parts of them have been translated. And again, they tend to be a continuation of one another that was started in chapter 8 and 9. So chapter 8, 9, 10, and 11 really revolve around the same theme, and it just seems that the Bab just gets more deeper and deeper and deeper in each of these chapters. Chapter 10 consists of about 30 8 handwritten lines. These are rather shorter chapters, but very profound. And chapter 11 has only 6 lines. Now, I want to point out something. I know some of you are very eager to know what's in these chapters, and I will tell you the only way you can truly get the full essence of it, you have to read it in the original language. And I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm just telling you that's the reality of it. Okay, you have to. There's no, scholars, Dr. Saidi, myself, others will give their own perspective, but for you to have that personal experience, you have to read the Word of God in its original form. Without a shadow of a doubt, that is the way that will give you impact. Will be more impactful. Now, I wanted to take a moment to point out something about Edward Granville Brown's summary of the Persian Bayán. I have said in the past that he often is, he does a good summary, but there are many times, especially when I noticed in this chapter, where he is way off the mark. I will tell you that just from my perspective, he was way off the mark. He didn't understand it. He was just trying to translate it literally. And he obviously did not have the benefit of Baha'u'llah's revelation at the time to shed more light on it. We all do. I've had the benefit of being able to have studied Baha'u'llah's revelation. So my insight to the writings of the Bab, based on but little I know or little I comprehend here, is further. So I just want to caution you, some of you, those of you, we've provided the summary, the abstract, which was edited by Dr. Moujan Momen in his selections from the writings of E.G. Brown. But don't think that it is the gospel, so to speak, of that it is exactly what is the Bayan. You got to take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes he on some of the less abstruse concepts, he gets it, he translates it correctly, but on some others, he's way off the mark, in my opinion. So just wanted to provide you with that perspective. Moving on to chapter 12. Chapter 12 with 65 handwritten lines in the original language is the third longest chapter of book 3. It is the continuation of to some degree of chapter 11 as well, where the Bab began his exegesis on the invocation, Bismillah al-Amna al-Aqdas. Now, for some of you, you may recall the Bayan began with that invocation. Bismillah al-Amna al-Aqdas. In the name of God, the most exalted, the most holy. This chapter, the Bab actually makes a commentary. I mean, he was the commentator par excellence, as he had commented and done a commentary on the Surah of Joseph, commentary on Surah al-Baqarah, on many, and then the entire Quran 9 times. So we know he is the authority on that. So in this chapter, he just takes this single line, Bismillah al-Amna al-Aqdas, and he expounds on it. Okay, so and it's amazing, it's elegant, it's just mind-boggling. But unfortunately, I can't share it with you because again, it's beyond the scope of our discussion. So just to show you that oftentimes throughout the Bayan, the Bab takes a verse either from the Quran or from his previous writings, or from that same writing, and he expounds on it, and he basically reveals the significance of that. Anyhow, moving on to the chapter 12, there is only a small section of this chapter has been translated by the Baha'i World Center. So we're getting into the part that has been translated, and here's the translation. And this part of it was missing, so I just added the one with the bolded yellow here is the part that I have translated, but essentially it relates to that passage. The Bab writes, the fruit of this knowledge, it's talking about knowledge in general, is that if at the time of the appearance of him whom God will make manifest, all the dwellers of the earth were to bear witness unto a thing whereunto he beareth witness differently, his testimony would be like unto the sun, while theirs would be even as a false image produced in a mirror which is not facing the sun. Beautiful. For had it been otherwise, their testimony would have proved a faithful reflection of his testimony. So this is from the selections from the writings, the passage number 28. Then it continues. The Bab states, I swear by the most sacred essence of God, that but one line of the words uttered by him, by whom? By him whom God shall make manifest, is more sublime than the words uttered by all that dwell on earth. This is why, you shouldn't question him. He's the all-knowing, the all-wise. He is the supreme manifestation of God. You must bow your head and you must do as he says. And in fact, later on in chapter 4, he says, even if he orders you to go on a crusade or on a jihad, you must accept it implicitly and lay down your life for him. I mean, this is what the Bab talks about. So here, again, the Bab is explaining the exalted nature of him whom God shall make manifest and his station. And then he goes on to say, it's very beautiful. I'll read it again. I swear by the most sacred essence of God that but one line of the words uttered by him is more sublime than the words uttered by all that dwell on earth. Nay, I beg forgiveness for making this comparison. How could the reflections of the sun in the mirror compare with the wondrous rays of the sun in the visible heaven? The station of one is that of nothingness, while the station of the other, by the righteousness of God, hallowed and magnified be his name, is that of the reality of things. Just let's put it into perspective. Let's look at it even from an astrophysics and cosmological way. The sun, which we've now have had the good fortune of seeing what it looks like a little bit closer, that the surface of the sun and the sun that we call the sun, relative. Now, just imagine that, the analogy and the comparison. Imagine that great body, that celestial body that gives us the rays, and it gives us the energy, the heat, the warmth that brings life to us. And then imagine a mirror, a small mirror that we hold in our hand reflecting that sun. So this is where the Bab says, I even beg forgiveness to make that kind of a comparison, because it's just astronomical. It would be to just compare that would be almost sacrilegious, he says. So to show the grandeur, the majesty of him whom God shall make manifest, how he tries to pave the way, how he tries to show so clearly, and yet those few who fail to recognize Baha'u'lláh, it's mind-boggling. But it always seems to happen. There's always those people who kind of fall off the wagon, And moving on to the next passage in this selection, the Bab says, if in the day of his manifestation, a king were to make mention of his own sovereignty, this would be like unto a mirror challenging the sun. Oh my goodness. This is, I gave a course at Wilmette regarding Baha'u'llah's Loh Sultan. And for those of you who've taken the course, and some of those, you may just want to, you read Baha'u'llah's majestic tablet and how gracious, how incredibly gracious he was to this pompous and an imperious monarch that was Nasruddin Shah. And it just, again, and here the Bab says, and in some ways, he's making a somewhat of a comparison to his discourse with Muhammad Shah, who at this time had passed away, because around in 1848, Muhammad Shah dies, and his young son, heir apparent, Nasruddin Shah, was at the time about 18 years of age, becomes the king. And out from the fire into the frying pan, so to speak. I mean, just from one incompetent monarch to another severely incompetent monarch. And you see the Bab revealed several magnificent letters to Muhammad Shah. And several of them have been translated by the Baha'i World Center as in the selections from the writings. You'll see that, how gracious, how wonderful. And eventually, it seems that God is losing patience, particularly when through the coercion and through the machinations of Haj Mirza Abbasi, the prime minister of Muhammad Shah, the Bab was exiled to Maku and later Chehriye. So here, in some ways, the Bab is trying to, he says, okay, what you've done to me, okay, it's water under the bridge, even though you've committed a horrendous act, but do not do it to him whom God shall make manifest. Do not, and so he's, again, here he says, even in the day of his manifestation, a king were to make mention of his own sovereign, just to mention it. This would be like unto a mirror challenging the sun, saying the light is in me. It would be likewise if a man of learning in his day were to claim to be an exponent of knowledge. Oh my goodness, like the son of the wolf, Sheikh Muhammad Taqi Najafi, an absolute ignorant prelate who just had nothing. It was just, to me, he was the lowest of the low. And yet he did so much as an inveterate enemy of Bahá'u'lláh and killed and martyred so many Baha'is during his time, an absolute bloodthirsty, tyrant. So here, it would be likewise if a man of learning in his day were to claim to be an exponent of knowledge, or if he who is possessed of riches were to display his affluence, or if a man wielding power were to assert his own authority, or if one invested with grandeur were to show forth his glory. So he's giving all these scenarios that you could possibly, if you're a king, if you're a knowledgeable man, if you're a successful individual, you have to humble yourself because you are nothing compared to the majesty and the grandeur of the King of Glory, the him whom God shall make manifest. Incredible. Nay, such a man would become the object of the derision of their peers. It actually, he says, it's this translation, derision of the peers. Baha'u'lláh says, they laugh at him. I mean, truly, in retrospect, people are going to laugh. I mean, we sadly laugh at people, in the times of Baha'u'lláh, whether high-ranking or low-ranking, ignorant or knowledgeable, who criticize Baha'u'lláh or who try to undermine his existence, his revelation, and so on and so forth. And really, it's sad. We laugh and we have a bit of a tears in our eyes at the sadness of this, but it's laughable. It's laughable, and where are they now? Where's the revelation of Baha'u'lláh? Where's Nasruddin Shah? It just, it is laughable, and what happened, and but it's an object lesson for humanity. This ends that passage from the translation of the House of Justice in the selections from the writings. Moving on to chapter 13 is also been translated, the portions of it. Chapter 13 with 83 handwritten lines in the original language is the lengthiest chapter of Book 3. This chapter is entitled on this, that it is not permissible to question him whom God shall make manifest except in writing. So the Bab says, okay, if you're going to if you have the courage to even want to ask a question, you have to put it in writing. You cannot just, blurb out whatever the heck you think you want. It's just unworthy. You have to put it in writing. And then he says it has to be written in a beautiful penmanship as well. So when you present it to him, there is, there's no air of pompousness. There's no arrogance in it. It just has to be with humility. So a couple of lines after this, the Báb continues. He says the substance of this gate or chapter is that it is not permissible to ask questions from him whom God will make manifest, except that which will beseemeth him. Not beseemeth you, but beseemeth him. For his station is that of the essence of divine revelation. Whatever evidence of bounty is witnessed in the world is but an image of his bounty, and everything owes its existence to his being. He continues, the Bayan is from the beginning to the end. This is that very famous apostrophe by the Báb about Bahá'u'lláh and him whom God shall make manifest. The Bayan is from beginning to the end, the repository of all of his attributes and the treasury of both his fire and his light. Should anyone desire to ask questions, he is allowed to do so only in writing, that he may derive ample understanding from his written reply, and that it may serve as a sign from his beloved. When the uncle of the Báb, Haji Mirza Sayyid Muhammad, the Khala Akbar, the uncle who was the more senior, who when he attained the presence of Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad in January of 1861, and he asked his questions. The first meeting where he attained the presence of Baha'u'lláh, the uncle had asked that he had several questions, and Baha'u'lláh said, "Please repair to where you're staying and write down your question and bring it the next day." So he asked that, and we do have those questions. Mr. Balyuzi have translated it in Baha'u'lláh, King of Glory. There are 4 questions that he asked, and then the Kitab-i-Iman was revealed in 48 hours. And it was transcribed in the beautiful handwriting of Abdul Baha, who was at that time about 16 years old, beautiful penmanship, and was submitted to the uncle of the Báb. And then thence began the history of the revelation of this magnificent book, the Book of Certitude. Immediately after this passage, the Báb says, however, let no one ask aught that may prove unworthy of his lofty station. Again, another warning, do not ask anything that would be offensive or be presumptuous. For instance, were a person to inquire the price of straw, the Báb goes to such an extent to show even the daft of the individuals that are out there, that may want to ask like stupid questions. So he gives an example. Again, if your question is going to be like this, don't do it. So he says, for instance, were a person to inquire the price of straw from a merchant of rubies, how ignorant would he be and how unacceptable? Similarly, unacceptable would be the question of the highest ranking people of the world in his presence, except such words as he himself would utter about himself in the day of his manifestation. Then this is the passage that I found very fascinating and somewhat of a prophecy of the revelation of the Kitab al-Badi. It says, methinks, the Báb says, methinks I visualize those who would, prompted by their own deluded conceptions, write to him and ask him questions about that which has been revealed in the Bayan. And it's exactly what happened and with those questions to Baha'u'lláh in Adrianople, where it prompted from his pen the Kitab al-Badi, and then he quotes from the Kitab al-Badi, from the Bayan verbatim. And you know, Baha'u'lláh in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf says that he's never read the Bayan. Never read the Bayan, but he's quoting long passages from the Bayan verbatim. So he says, methinks I visualize those who would, prompted by their own deluded conceptions, write to him and ask him questions about that which hath been revealed in the Bayan, and he would answer them with words not of his own. It's very interesting. Not of his own, but divinely inspired, saying, verily, verily, I am God. No God is there but me. I have called into being all the created things. I have raised up divine messengers. You know, I have raised divine messengers. I'll come back to that. In the past, and have sent down books unto them. Take heed not to worship anyone but God. He who is my Lord and your Lord, this indeed is the undoubted truth. This reference to Baha'u'lláh being that I have raised up divine messengers is actually, there is a tablet where Baha'u'lláh says, Enna isman al-mursal. The word mursal comes from the three-word root rasala, which means to send, to, you know, and then this is where Rasulullah, the prophet of God, the apostle of God, the messenger of God, a title of Prophet Muhammad, is that. Whereas Mursal is the one who sends messengers. Now, in one of my presentations, which is posted on the YouTube about in the 5 declarations of Baha'u'lláh, in the section, I believe in the third webinar there, where I talk about Madinatul Sabr, the city of patience, where Baha'u'lláh, the tablet that was revealed in Arabic, very lengthy tablet, which we don't have a full official translation, but we do have a very good provisional translation by Dr. Khazir Fanonapazir. It's posted on Baha'i library.com. And in that, Baha'u'lláh speaks that Job, he talks about the patience of Job, and this is the city of patience. And he says that we sent Job. And if you read that carefully, and I've done a retranslation, sort of more of a fine-tuning of the first couple of pages of Madinatul Sabr, and it's posted there, you can see in the webinar as well, that Baha'u'lláh talks about how he, with his own, through his own words, that he says, we sent Job, we clothed him with the mantle of prophethood. It's fascinating. So here the Bab says that him whom God shall make manifest will speak that verily, verily, I am God. He does that in Surah Al-Haykal. Okay? Anni an Allah, you know, he says that. Verily, verily, I am God. No God is there but me. I have called into being all the created things. I have raised up divine messengers in the past and have sent down books unto them. Take heed not to worship anyone but God. He who is my Lord and your Lord, this indeed is the undoubted truth. Now, again, this gets into this theological notion of, okay, well, you know, where is Baha'u'lláh? Again, friends, I don't care to go too much into it, but, you know, again, in my very imperfect way, you know, you have the Godhead, you have the unknowable essence that is in this cloud of unknowing, in Amma, resides there. And then there are the various levels, the primal will, where the Bab talks about, of messengers and vicegerents and manifestations of God. There are different levels, apparently, because they all say that there is, both Baha'u'lláh and the Bab say there's different rank and file. And so Baha'u'lláh obviously is at the highest level. He is the supreme, the most exalted. Here stated by by the Báb, and Baha'u'lláh makes this claim in many of his tablets during the Adrianople period. You just have to read it. Read Surah Haykal as well. It's there. And the Guardian also in many of his letters talks about the dispensation of Baha'u'lláh, and also in Tawqiyah Sadadah, the 110 letter that Shoghi Effendi wrote to the Baha'is of the East. Incredible. He talks about the various stations of Baha'u'lláh and his position, and very graphically quoting from Baha'u'llah's own words. Continuing on, the Báb, the next passage, he says, however, alike shall it be to me if ye believe in me. And again, this is him whom God shall make manifest speaking. Ye will provide good for your own souls if you believe in me, basically, it says. And if ye believe not in me, nor in that which God hath revealed unto me, ye will suffer yourselves to be shut out as by a veil. For verily I have been independent of you heretofore, and shall remain independent hereafter. Therefore it behooveth you, O creatures of God, to help your own selves and to believe in the verses revealed by me. God does not need us. We need him. Simply put. So that ends that passage, which was passage 29 of the selections from the writings, paragraphs 1 and 2. And this is the section that the House of Justice had commissioned the translation of in chapter 13. Now, next chapter 14, or is it, what are we talking about? No, chapter 13. Sorry, we're still in chapter 13. I apologize. Later in this chapter, the Báb, while shedding light on the true meaning of various aspects of God's progressive revelation. This is a very lengthy chapter, probably one of the central chapters of book 3. So there's a lot of material covered by the Báb in here. He makes a remarkable and fascinating reference to the precise date of the revelation of Adam. I found this was new to me, and I wanted to share this with you. I know many of you have studied the Bible and the sort of the dating of the revelation and the creation, Genesis and all that. This kind of blew my mind. He says, Zuhure Adam, this is referred to Hazrat Adam is Adam. Okay, the revelation of Adam with respect to his own revelation. So the Báb gives an actual precise date. He states that from the appearance of Adam until the advent of the point of Bayan, 12,210 years have elapsed, which, assuming solar years, dates the appearance of Adam to about 10,000 BCE. Just take 12,210, subtract that with 1844, and you get 10,366. I just found that very fascinating. I'd never seen that a manifestation of God give a precise date. And we know so little about Adam because, in fact, many consider that Adam was the first human. It's not true. Baha'u'llah says that's the sort of the origin of recorded history. Adam was a messenger of God, according to both Báb and Baha'u'llah. And here the Báb says the revelation of him was about 10,000 BCE, and very fascinating, very fascinating. I'm sure many of you will go back to your Bible and try to figure how this correlates and all that. But this is, again, a gift. The Báb just shares from his divine knowledge. Here it's edited to the precise. He says 12,210 years. It blew me out of the water. Absolutely. It's not even an estimate. It's an exact date, which, again, I had not seen or heard anywhere else. And Baha'u'llah in his writings have said that prior to Adam, there were other prophets, but there's their records have been lost. So obviously, in some way indirectly, the creation was not only 10,000 or 20,000 years ago, which we now know through scientific carbon dating, through various means that, and this has been what cause of controversy between reconciling the Bible or the book of Genesis and, the scientific understanding of the origin of solar system and the creation of Earth and so on and so forth, that we know it's, I believe it's 4.6 billion years ago. So anyhow, I found that to be very fascinating. So that's something for you to ponder on. Moving on to chapter 14, begins with these words, on the divine decree that each individual must preserve the Bayan in the most reverent way possible. This gets in a very special, section that also is very dear to my heart, and you'll see that. So on the divine decree, it's a divine decree that each individual must preserve the Bayan in the most reverent way, keeping the Bayan. The substance of this gate, the Bab says, is that which remaineth amongst the people from the tree of truth are his words and the spirit that surrounds it. So he says, what you will have from me once I'm gone, we have his sacred remains in the shrine on Mount Carmel, his earthly remains, but really what we know of the Bab are his words. This is what, we get insight into his revelation, into, even his own person is through his words. And he says there's also a spirit that surrounds that, the spirit, and it's beautiful, where the more we read, he says that spirit will permeate into us, which is so true. I felt it. I'm sure you guys have felt it through your own studies of the writings of both the Bab and Bahá'u'lláh. There's something magical about the creative word. So he says that what remains amongst the people from the tree of truth, a reference to himself, are his words and the spirit that surrounds it. Thus, the more people strive to preserve, honor, and exalt his words, the more these words become manifest in their spirits. So the more you preserve it, the more these words become manifest in their spirits. Then he goes on to say in the next, let's see, it's in this chapter or perhaps next chapter. With only 27 handwritten lines in the original language, chapter 14 is one of the shorter chapters of book 3, and no parts of it have been translated by the Baha'i World Center nor discussed or quoted by Dr. Saidi in his book. So this is, you're seeing it here for the first time. In chapter 15, he begins, and again, it's continuation of this very magnificent theme about preservation of the Bayan and sanctity of it, and how we must approach the Bayan. He who becomes a believer, first he starts, he who becomes a believer in whom God shall make manifest would indeed be a believer in God and his cause, and in all the worlds of God. And whosoever does not recognize and believe in him whom God shall make manifest shall enter the infernal fire, even though he may believe in God and what he hath commanded in the former times. So he says, if you believed in the previous revelations, once it has expired and the new one has been revealed to you, your duty is that revelation. So he's talking about, he's making an indirect reference about those, obviously Muslims who fail to recognize him, but he shifts the focus to him whom God shall make manifest. He says, if you're a believer in him whom God shall make manifest, you achieved greatness. And in fact, this echoes the first paragraph of the Kitab Aqdas. Those of you know that very well, that you have, he who has attained to the station, Baha'u'lláh says, has attained unto all good. I would invite you to read the first paragraph of the Kitab Aqdas even more closely, especially when you're reading this passage. This echoes that. So he refers to the fire. He says basically he's using the analogy of the hell or the infernal fire of hell, that you are going to be removed, remote from God if you do not recognize him whom God shall make manifest. The Bab continues, that was the title, that one long sentence was really the title of it. And then he begins with this, the substance of this gate is that the manifestation of God in every revelation where the primal will is intended hath been and shall always be the glory of God, Baha'u'lláh, before whose splendor all things are but nothing. Now, this is the first time that the Bab is actually making mention of Baha'u'lláh. This concealed reference by the Bab to the person of Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri, should be Nuri, it's autocorrect just keeps, anyways, it should N-U-R-I, so I'll correct this here right now. Nuri. As Baha'u'lláh is, according to the late eminent Baha'i scholar and hand of the cause of God, Hassan Balyuzi, the first time the Bab has actually mentioned the name Baha'u'lláh in his writing. So the first time Baha'u'lláh is mentioned in full, not just Baha, but Baha'u'lláh, is in the Bayan, and this is the first instance of it that Mr. Balyuzi has referred to it. And I've given you the references on page 43 of Baha'u'lláh, King of Glory, where Hassan Balyuzi says that up until then, the word Baha'u'lláh had not been mentioned by the Bab, but in the Bayan, it has been mentioned by him. With 33 handwritten lines in the original language, chapter 15 is among the average length chapters of book 3. No parts of it, unfortunately, have been translated or discussed previously. Chapter 16 is entitled, "It is not permissible to act other than that which is in accordance with the writings of the point of the Bayan." Essentially, he is the lawgiver. The manifestation of God is the lawgiver. Bayan dictates what you do. You live your life by that. You live and die by that, as many of the great heroes, the Bábí heroes like Váḥids, Mullah Hussain, Quddus, Hujjat did. They lived by the Bayan and died by the Bayan, you know. It is in this chapter that the Bab makes the famous statement, which has been immortalized by Shoghi Effendi in God Passes By, page 25. "Well is it with him who fixeth his gaze upon the order of Baha, Nazm Baha'u'lláh," you know, he says that order of Baha'u'lláh, "and rendereth thanks unto his Lord, for he will assuredly be made manifest. God hath indeed irrevocably ordained it in the Bayan." I mean, can you get any more clear without the Bab coming and actually saying, hey, you know that person, Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri, he is Baha'u'lláh, okay? And he's going to declare, you know, himself first, you know, in the Siyah Chal, you know, in a hidden fashion. And then for 10 years, he's going to, you know, conceal himself, and then he's going to reveal himself. I mean, that would be the only other way, you know, and obviously to protect Baha'u'lláh from the onslaught of the enemies. But anyone who was even remotely familiar with the writings of the Bab and had a just mind and a pure heart would have, without a shadow of a doubt, recognized Mirza Hussain Ali as being him whom God shall make manifest. In fact, people did prior to Baha'u'llah's open private declaration in the Garden of Najibiyeh. They did recognize him, you know, and as him whom God shall make manifest. So in the previous chapter, in 15, he mentions the name Baha'u'lláh, and then he again in chapter 16, he says, well is it with him who fixeth his gaze upon the order of Baha'u'lláh and rendereth thanks unto his Lord, for he will assuredly be made manifest. So again, he's talking about him whom God shall make manifest throughout, and then suddenly he says, Baha'u'lláh shall be manifest. And God hath indeed irrevocably ordained it in the Bayan. I mean, can you get any more clear than that? I don't think so. So towards the end of this relatively short chapter, which is only 29 handwritten lines in the original language, the Bab writes, even should he whom God shall make manifest choose not to reveal himself or make himself known unto anyone, the bayan that he ordaineth, what he will reveal, basically, his writings. Because remember, bayan is also mentioned as the whole corpus of the revelation of God. You know, the Bab has explained that there's a specific book, the Bayan, but later on, the Bab has designated every revelation of the manifestation of God, including himself, is the Bayan. And everything that Bahá'u'lláh reveals is also can be viewed as the Bayan as well. Okay, so here he says the Bayan that he ordaineth would be like unto a sun amongst the stars. Okay, again, another cosmological analogy for the people who could just only see, okay, well, the sun is brighter, the stars are just these little sparkles in the heavens. This is the time when all people are wrapped in their own veils. They're wrapped in their own veils. Very interesting. Even as when the point of the Bayan wrote 3 commentaries on the Quran, 2 commentaries in the mode of divine verses, complete to the end, and a commentary on the Surah of the Cow in the mode of educational discourse. Indeed, all the commentaries written by the interpreters of the Quran from the inception of its revelation until its abrogation cannot even equal to even 1 letter of his commentaries. So all these commentaries, I remember when I was taking a course on Islam, there was a collection that was being translated of the various commentators and all that. It was being translated by Professor Mahmoud Ayub. You know, and again, I was looking at all of this, and then, you know, when you look at the Bab's and Baha'u'llah's commentaries, it's just night and day. And here, you know, the Bab says all the commentaries from the beginning by all the great, you know, commentators of the Quran, Sunni or Shia alike, they cannot equal even 1 letter of his commentaries, okay, of the Bab, he says, you know, and so on. This is a translation by Dr. Saidi in Gate of the Heart, by the way, this one. Then moving on to chapter 17, it consists of about 27 handwritten lines. And this is where, remember in several chapters earlier where the Bab was talking about this theme of preservation of the Bayan and with great sanctity, respect, and it should be, you know, and then remember in book 2, it talked about that in future they're going to pay 1,000 misqals of gold for a good copy of it as well. I mean, you know, here he completes that thought. He says, it is unlawful to transcribe any of the writings of the point of the Bayan unless it is done so in the best penmanship. Ahsanul khat. Ahsanul khat. And no one must keep in their possession, he goes on to say, even a single revealed letter unless it has been transcribed with exquisite penmanship. Otherwise, that person's goodly deed would be diminished and he would not be accounted among the faithful. Oh my goodness. I mean, what a command. That if you just basically wrote down the creative word in kind of chicken scratches or something in shorthand, it's not worthy. You cannot do it. And again, this underscores the significance of, you know, the word of God in this revelation. Because in the past, obviously in the Quranic dispensation, you know, there are these beautiful illuminated Qurans that everybody had. We actually have a copy of what the Bab's Quran looked like beautifully. It was illuminated, beautiful. But yet he says, with the writings of him meaning the Bab, the point of the Bayan, as well as later the writings of him whom God shall make manifest, they must be presented even in a more exalted way. And now no one can just make, just write them out in a very sort of a rough way. It has to be done it has to be beautifully presented. I want to bring to your attention, if you've noticed that when the House of Justice translates new translations, we have a new translation just came out. These books are beautiful. These first editions, I always say, these are collector's editions, and the house goes to a great extent to get them beautifully leather bound, or at least presented with gold embossment. And I mean, it's just so beautifully done. And that's it. As the trustees of the Word of God, they know that it has to be presented in a very, very befitting way. I mean, when the Kitab Aqdas came out in its original language edition after in 1992-93, I mean, for those of you who have a copy of it, it's just magnificent. It's I mean, even if you can't read Arabic and Persian, I would say you should get a copy of it, because it just was so, those first edition that the House of Justice put out, just beautifully. It had gold leafing on it. It just magnificent, absolutely magnificent. So this Ahsanul Khat, he later on talks about. Khat means script. It has to be that the best of penmanship. And no one must keep it in their possession. Even a single letter of it, it has to be done. And if you don't do this, you're not amongst the believers. The Bab says, so man, it just, so there were people who had good penmanship that used to transcribe these manuscripts. But unfortunately, many of them were destroyed. But again, they were supposed to be done in a very beautiful and befitting way in the best of script. And I will tell you, the Tam edition, it's in a beautiful Nasta'aliq style. The Azali manuscript that we have was done beautifully. I have to give it credit for that. Whoever was the calligrapher back in the 1940s who did that, he was a great calligrapher. Then he goes on, and I want to kind of expound on this here. I want to say that this extraordinary command by the Bab to present his writings in the most excellent way is also echoed in the writings of Bahá'u'lláh. And I'm going to share something here with you that many of you may not have seen or have had access to. In one of his tablets addressed to the company of his faithful followers, the Blessed Beauty demands this this is a presentation I did on Baha'i script several years ago at the ABS. And so this is the provisional translation of this tablet, and I'm going to actually share the tablet in its original for you as well here. Baha'u'lláh writes, O my servants and mirrors of my beauty, if ye can find a person who could melt and liquefy diamond, then write these precious and wondrous words with the pen that writeth in diamond ink, and disseminate these diamond-studded words in every land until such time that the divine verses are fully published among all his people. If, however, ye were not able to find anyone who could liquefy diamond for you to write with, and thus were unable to achieve this task, then write that which hath been revealed from the firmament of sanctity with pure gold. Having transcribed the divine verses in pure gold, send them then to all my cities and territories, that perchance the people of these lands may gain near access to the unconstrained beauty, and thereby be guided to him, and may drink from the life-giving waters that floweth in his most exalted and wondrous path. Verily, this is your Lord's testament unto you, if ye be of them that hearken to his call. Magnificent. Okay, liquefied diamond. And again, if you can't get it, which obviously is not possible, you do it in pure gold. This is from a tablet which was published, and there's two excerpts in the tablet, one in Arabic, where Baha'u'lláh says, وَأَنْتُمْ يَا أَهْلَ الْبَحَاءِ, and then continues, in there. It's very similar. And then he also reveals it in Persian. It's not identical, but it's very similar. I'll read the Persian one as well. پس شما ای بندگان من و مرایای جمال من اگر یافتید نفسی را که این که قادر باشد که الماس را حل نماید و جریان دهد، پس بنویسید این کلمات بدیع منیع را به مداد الماسیه و نشر دهید او را در هر بلاد تا آنکه آثار الهی در مابین عباد او انتشار یابد و اگر نیافتید و قادر بر او نگشتید، پس بنویسید آنچه از سماع تقدیس نازل شده به ذهب خالص و بفرستید به مدینه ها و دیارهای من که شاید اهل دیار به جمال مختار راه یابند و هدایت شوند و سبیل قدس منی و تسنیم عز بدی بیاشامند. این است وصیت پروردگار شما اگر هستید از شنوندگان. So this is the provisional translation that I provided previously is of this passage as well. The Arabic one is very, very similar, but the Persian one is a little bit more detailed. Anyways, I'll leave that up, obviously, for those who can read Persian and Arabic. They can, and the reference to this is Asar Kalam Allah, which is in the, I have given the where to find this in the original published version in volume 7 of Asar Kalam Allah, that was in the provisional translation that I provided. Okay, we're coming to the end of this chapter, but there's some very more fascinating themes here. The Bab continues his exposition on this theme by stating that the substance of this gate, again, going back to the Bab now, but I just wanted to tell you that Baha'u'lláh, obviously, in consonance with the Bab, have said that the creative words have to be beautifully rendered. And I will tell you something. Some of you may know that there's an illuminated Kitab Aqdas that the House of Justice have put on the website Bahá'u'lláh.org. And that illuminated Aqdas, which is absolutely magnificent, Abdul Baha commissioned it. And I will tell you, he commissioned it in the early 1900s, I think about 1903. If you know the history of the ministry of Abdul Baha, that was probably one of the most difficult years where he was being harassed and by both the covenant breakers as well as the government of Turkey, Sultan Abdul Hamid II. But the cause of God continues. So Abdul Baha actually had that commission, that illuminated Aqdas, which is absolutely magnificent, beautiful, gorgeous, that we have in the International Baha'i Archives. So again, the head of the faith, they know. The guardian himself also, he commissioned Mr. Mohibat from Iran to come in the 1930s and illuminate several of the tablets of Baha'u'lláh. And we have, both in the archives and various facsimiles and photographs of it is available. And this gentleman, who was an illuminator, worked for a number of months. And I believe he came to the World Center a couple of times, and he presented this beautiful legacy of these illuminated. So the Bab, Baha'u'lláh, Abdul Baha, Shoghi Effendi were 100% in tune with the fact that the revelation must be illuminated, must be presented. In fact, the way we present if we have an illuminated verse from God, the greatest name, it has to be presented in such a way, with such respect. These are all, again, it stems from His Holiness the Bab in the Bayan. So he goes on and continuing with this theme, he adds that the substance of this gate is that all the written expressions that have been revealed by the point of the Bayan are designated as the Bayan. Okay, so he's now telling us that Bayan not only is his book, but all his revelation is referred to as the Bayan. Dr. Saidi in his book also talks about this as well extensively. But here, this is the chapter where, and I have translated it. This is my translation here. However, this name refers in its primal reality to the divine verses, ayat, and its secondary reality to munajat, prayers, third reality to commentaries, tafsir, fourth reality to different spheres of knowledge, sovare ilmiye. It's very interesting. It's rather hard to translate that, but different spheres of knowledge. That's my best translation. Sovare ilmiye. And the fifth reality to the Persian words, kalamat farsiye. Nevertheless, the Bab continues, this appellation, the Bayan, solely refers to divine verses to the exclusion of all others. So again, as I said to you, that Bayan can also mean divine verses as a whole, but also he says that it also means the whole revelation of the Bab, as well as the various degrees. It encompasses various modes, if you will. And here, this is the five modes that that the Bab is talking about: ayat, munajat, tafasir, sovar ilmiye, kalamat farsiye. The Bab further adds that thus it is permissible, he goes on to say, he's talking about Bayan, the word Bayan here. It says, so it is permissible that some may bear the name Abdul Bayan. So if you wanted to name your child Bayan, they should be, he actually says, I know there are people who are named Bayan, but he said they should be called Abdul Bayan, the servant of Bayan, not Bayan, But anyways, that's what the Bab is saying here. Inasmuch as the name God, Allah, is derived from the substance of Bayan, and the first who called himself by the name Bayan was God. Glorified and exalted be he, and he hath revealed, I verily am God. There is none other God but me, the one, the Bayan. Okay, so now this exposition really puts it into perspective. So Bayan is part and parcel of what God is, and here he uses that expression. Continuing on this, again, these are not previously translated. This one is in the gate of the heart, that the one I just read you, and continues. He says, indeed, the entire mystery of the Bayan is manifested in its name, for the numerical value of the word al-Bayan, together with its integrative form of unity, equals the numerical value of the words for God, lillah, rendering the word Bayan a mirror for the point of the Bayan, which in turn is the supreme mirror of the worlds for God, as well as mirrors for him whom God shall make manifest, inasmuch as he is the supreme mirror of the words for God. Now, this has been explained in Gate of the Heart by Dr. Saidi, but I just wanted to show you, this is just one of the more simpler commentaries and discussions, and yet it is not easily comprehensible. I mean, we have to read it several times. I mean, it's clear, but I just want to tell you the parts that I have passed over are far, far deeper than this. And, so again, forgive me. And I beg forgiveness for the Bab to have glossed over some of the chapters, but really we're just going over. This is a very concise study. God willing, down the road, there will be other more detailed studies of the Bayan. So this is chapter 17. And so further on in this chapter, the Bab writes, thus, just as today the letters of gospel are distinguished amongst other communities in the art of the ornament, the believers in the Bayan should likewise reflect in their handiwork not but perfection within the limits of each endeavor, in such wise that a faithful believer in the Bayan in the east of the earth should be beloved in his station on account of his beauty and the beauty of all that he possesses. And this is the most mighty path for attracting the peoples of other religions to the true cause of the all-merciful God. However, these are all binding to the extent that one possesses the means to do so, not to inflict pain on oneself towards perfecting things. So here we do our best, but we're not here to self-mortify. We're not here to do just moderation, but you aspire for excellence, but you do not push yourself to an extent where it will become a cause of injury, to you and to others. And then chapter 18 and 19 follow a similar theme as chapter 17, and no parts of them have been discussed. And so we're going to I think this gave you an overview of the last three chapters, 17, 18, 19, is essentially the same theme. So I think this is it for end of book 3. So this is book 3, a lot of very, very important concepts that the Báb has introduced here.